lack of truth to it. But in light of, the horrifying things that are happening right now on a seemingly daily basis, I guess I hope that this Dharma talk, even though it is about me, but it's about how Zen has informed my life through my days, even before I knew what Zen was. I hope it will help you remember that it's also happening with you. And as we find ourselves at this time in the world, our practice can only help strengthen and kind of lessen the sense of me and help us to place ourselves in the world with a little bit more equanimity and loving kindness and compassion. So having said that, about a year ago, Hojo asked me that I should speak to you about music and the Dharma, and it was a long time ago, so I said sure. and then it got closer, and I always struggled with these things. So luckily, in the last couple of weeks, one of the Dharma quotes that someone places on the STO Facebook page or the ASZC Facebook page, kind of a weekly Matsuoka quote came up. And like any good Zen teaching, when you need one for anything, it will come to you and it applies. So I thought I would begin by reading the one that appeared a couple of weeks ago. Matsuoka said, "The person who fails to see life as a process, a pattern of energy, fails to live their life in accord with its flow. The world is not of things, it is a process. Everything is alive because it flows. It cannot be stopped and kept. If it is clutched at, it is lost." So that the idea of patterns of energy and a flow, it's an interesting word, kind of helped me with this story. Is this kind of a story, a full circle story that begins with finding us in childhood and sort of a naive quality, but a joyful state, not because we're happy and giddy, but because we're engaged fully in whatever it is that we encounter as children. And we don't even know we're doing that, but I think it might be a universal quality for children. Then it becomes a story of a tighter focus, probably due to, biggest one would be school, and then the cultural and societal things that happen to us and expectations from parents and whoever. And I think that's when we really sculpt our individual quality of me, and it gets pretty solid. But I suppose if you're going to do that, that's a good time to do it, because we have things to do on a relative level. The problem is if that remains very strong. So then the next part of the story will be, as all of us kind of continue on in our lives doing whatever it is that we're doing, as we become more familiar with the language of whatever it is we do, we pay more attention. And some of us are fortunate to have Zen as a path that does inform our lives. And I think even the people who don't have a Buddhist path, many people find that what they do in their lives deepens their sense of everyone, that they're not alone. And I think in general, it's a very good thing, but we are fortunate to be on the path. Now, as Hojo said, I think I'll wait to say what Hojo said. I have a couple of things Hojo said, but the only other thing I'm going to read to you today is from Uchiyama's book, Deepest Practice, Deepest Wisdom. We've been studying Showaku Makusa since January, refraining from evil. And that it's kind of a long time to study a fascicle. In another way, it's hardly long at all. So we have been hearing refraining from for months now. And, you know, perhaps it's starting to carve a little nook in our minds what this could possibly mean. But I thought I would read to you about a part of Uchiyama's journey. He speaks very well and very clearly. He is talking about everything we encounter in our lives, that we should put all of our energy into it. And so he's talking about when he was first in the monastery and he became the Tenzo. And he said, even when working, if we let go of any notions or sentiments that might arise in regard to while we do it, we're able to do the work completely. After becoming ordained, I worked as a Tenzo or cook in the monastery throughout the war and the years following. Looking back on those days, it was a time I was always hungry. But luckily, if you were assigned to the kitchen, there were chances to nibble a little here and there. So that was a job I was always glad to take on. But of course, if you do have that sort of attitude, something is sure to go wrong. So around 1948, I really gave the matter some thought. Could there be anything more miserable than having taken all the trouble to become ordained, only to spend my time stealing food? So I resolved then and there not to go around sneaking food anymore. And from that time on, I was able to immerse myself in the work of the Tenzo and do it completely without screwing up. And he talks about screwing up, and there's a section in this chapter where he became famous for making rainbow rice as he was learning how to focus his attention, and all the monks always laughed at him. But the bottom layer of his rainbow rice was very dark, scorched and burned. The next layer was kind of golden burned, followed by a layer of completely inedible uncooked rice, only to be topped off by silky pale gruel at the top. So that's where he started learning how to cook rice. As those familiar with Zen monasteries in Japan already know, the cook is in charge of preparing the meals alone, while everyone else sits in zazen. So when zazen finishes, the cook has to be able to put all the food on the table with no delays, especially in winter when everybody's been sitting for several hours in the cold. When they're finally done, they come down for dinner. And even just putting the hot rice and miso soup on the table, along with some nice pickled dish, is no laughing matter. If you take that time out to snack or to eat a little bite here and there, even for a few seconds, you might not be able to finish the soup. The rice may not be ready, or something else will happen. You wait a few minutes for the rice, then the soup cools down, your tofu gets tough, and the miso loses its flavor. All sorts of things occur when your mind is on something else. But if you genuinely aspire to put the best meal together with the ingredients you have, and you earnestly make every effort to do so, the meal will surely come together. So I just like that story since we read it, because I don't know, it reminds me of my first experiences cooking rice. But anyway, while we were studying this part, I think Hojo did say that one of the qualities of experiencing refraining from is not making a distinction between sacred and mundane. So I think Uchiyama kind of showed us how that works. As we move on, I think, yeah, I talked about Zen informing our lives without us even knowing. So I'm going to move into childhood, which I sort of talked about, and we all probably can relate to that energy that we had as children, and a very naive quality. Our attention was equal to everything. And during that period, when I was 7, this huge, gigantic, very heavy 800-pound upright piano rolled into our basement from my grandma's house. That was my childhood memory of it. I don't think it rolled, but my dad did say it's staying there forever. So as any kid does, you play around on the keys. You can watch any child discover paints or clay or running outside. And I was no prodigy, but, loved to play around. Plus the piano came with an old-fashioned swivel stool with claws on its feet. And I did spend as much time swirling around on my stool as let me push that up. So that's a very nice time of my life. And then I remember hearing that there were going to be piano lessons. So this is where the focus begins to narrow a little bit. Now, my husband said when he heard he was going to have piano lessons, he was overjoyed. For me, it was more of dread. So anyway, I started piano lessons, and I was able, to identify notes on my little notepad. I could fill in the spaces and tell you what all the notes were, tell you what the clefs were. I could do meters, everything in its own little box. I could take care of all of that. When it came to putting those things together and playing a piece, that was a different story. And one more Hojo quote. He has always talked about two kinds of learning. I don't remember the animal for the first one, but it's a very fast flash in the pan kind of, I get it, move on to the next thing. It sounds wonderful. And then there's the old plodding, dull workhorse, which I recently discovered that's what I am. So, but it took me a long time to figure that out. So back to being a kid, when I had all these little parts, it was very hard to see the whole and even know how they were going to come together. I would cry when my mother would try to teach me how to make scrambled eggs because I didn't understand they were going to congeal. I just thought they were ruined. So I've always been a very slow, put my ducks out there for a long, long time, and then maybe it will come together. But the good thing about all that is I didn't know that I didn't know. And as a child, I think there's a great freedom in that. It still gives you space to do what needs to be done. So I plod along, and in fourth grade, I'm playing violin also. And there's safety in numbers in violins because we're all playing together, and my ear was decent. And I didn't know I was fooling anybody because I wasn't really conscious. But I remember my orchestra string conductor's giving me something to play, and I struggled, and he said, and I had no idea you couldn't read music. And so that was really shocking as a kid because I didn't want to be different, and I felt some shame. And so I, best as I could, tried to get my act together and really learn how to read music. So I was limping along, and I finally got to take harp lessons, which I wanted to do forever. And it didn't go well. I kind of wanted to quit. But my teacher actually said, I've done everything I can do with her. So luckily, my parents found another teacher who wasn't local, and she became my perfect teacher. I think there's even a book called that somewhere in the Buddhist collections, My Perfect Teacher. And when you run into the perfect teacher, something happens, and it's a very spacious quality, and you have all of the room to let this energy that Matsuoka was talking about, to let it kind of sit with you and continue to shape what's going to happen in your life. So I learned to love the solitude of practice. I traveled and studied with her teacher. It was a very good time. Then I went on to college with the same teacher, and adding to notes and all of the little parts that come together with music. There was theory and history, literature, chamber, orchestral, all kinds of things to kind of inform what's going on with music. It was pretty good. There were a lot of notes involved, and I had learned how to read music by then, so everything was fine. And in my 20s, I was 20 something, and of course I came to the conclusion that I knew everything, which now that I have children, I think that's a common occurrence at 20. And I just had it all figured out. I got married at 19, had 2 children by 26, and whew, it was going well. Moved to Kansas, took jobs at Wichita State University, and I started teaching harp there. And this is where my bubble starts to break. If you want to know what you don't know for sure, you should try to teach it what you need to teach to somebody else. That's really, really kind of scary and eye-opening. So in particular, I had one student who was a very good pianist, piano major, played violin, wanted to become a harp major, took to the harp really quickly, played in orchestra. Everything was swimmingly wonderful. And we had a composer in residence who had created an orchestral piece, and it was going to be performed with the orchestra in a couple of months. And this poor student, who was so wonderful, she just completely fell apart because it was a new piece and there was no recording to tell her how it goes. So it was very much similar to some of the problems that I struggled with and still was struggling with. I had another student who was not quite as, harp wasn't her thing, but she was playing in my now husband, Robert Glassman's opera orchestra. And one day she stomped into my office and said, "Oh, that Dr. Glassman, he's such a bear. He wants me to play all the notes." So that was another problem. And I think my students were going to make a t-shirt, but for me, because I always said to them, well, given you've tried your best and you're struggling and you're on the spot, you have a choice. You can put the wrong note in the right place or the right note in the wrong place. Now, if you have a choice, I would go with the wrong note in the right place. So this was sort of the beginning of me knowing that I wasn't paying attention to the rhythmic quality of music. My ears were always on the notes, just note, 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 note. And that's kind of where it was for me. So anyway, those are some good stories about my students. I started playing in the Metropolitan Orchestra, and I think I still had some serious problems about rhythm and counting, but you know, my ear was still getting me through. But luckily, when you play an instrument like harp, depending on the style of music, the part will either have a lot, like in Debussy, you'll be playing all the time, or Dvorak, say, you'll have a little bit here, and then measures and measures and measures of rest, and then maybe a lot here, and then none forever until the last measure. So you can't really rely on your ear too much. You could, but there's a real danger you're going to doze off and go to Arizona in your mind and miss it. So as it turned out, harp part will have 7 measures of rest, and then your part, and then it will indicate when meter changes, like from 4/4 to 5/8, or it will indicate when tempi change or key change. And so in a part where you are playing in an orchestra, every single beat in every single measure is accounted for. It's like a roadmap. And it became another one of my greatest teachers. I think I learned the most about playing by not playing, because I could follow this music and be right there, but I wasn't doing a thing. And so that was another turning point about notes and duration of notes. And it was a new experience. Like I said, I learn like the workhorse, because I have no idea if other people went through this or not. But I finally came along to this and figuring out that rhythm was where music is at. Okay, so my dad taught me how to drive a car. You know, things like don't grip the steering wheel too tight and don't worry about the guy behind you, and come to an intersection, you determine when you're going through, if that light changes yellow, where is the point of no return? When are you going to go through? When are you going to stop? You got to keep the big view. He also taught me the hardest thing, how to drive through a curve. Now, a curve, I mean, you know how it is. If you look right in front of you, you're just constantly a twitter trying to adjust the wheel to follow the curve. So my dad was saying, well, don't look in front of the hood. Look at that curve as far as your eye can see. That allows you kind of to see the whole thing. And your chances of seeing a deer run across the road are better. And the car magically can navigate that curve really pretty well if you take in the whole. So, you know, you're not loosey-goosey looking far away, and you're not clamping down looking at the ants in front of the hood. So you're ready for whatever comes. The thing I found out about practicing is sort of like navigating a curve. I had been putting all of my attention on the notes, and there are always a lot of notes, as you know, when you play something. When I would be performing by myself, I relied on muscle memory a lot, which is a very useful thing, except if you get distracted and that's all you have, it's very embarrassing what could happen, because monkey mind will show up while you're playing happily along. And a music monkey mind can come in a tuxedo and he'll say to you, oh, this is going so well, or hi, you thought you couldn't do that, or look, there's nobody in the audience, or oh my, your dress is too tight, and suddenly you'll come back to playing, and muscle memory is not quite enough, because coming back is very startling. So it kind of disrupts that whole thing. And the worst part about it is when you're playing that way, it's all about me. I'm playing, I'm doing notes, I'm doing badly, I'm doing very well. So that was a real problem for me. And I had a teacher, 85 years old, he said, you've really got to stop making so many mistakes. So anyway, I'm in my own way at this point. It was very, very difficult. So what I have figured out, and I'll get to how my Zen practice changed everything about it, is that the nature of music for me is kind of in a domain of preparation. The word preparation sounds like future, like you prepare your ingredients or you're preparing for a job interview. But in this sense, it's more of an accommodation sense instead of future. All of music, I think, has it every bit. Even conductors have something called a preparatory beat. And all it is showing you the curve in front of your hood. It's nothing fancy. I can tell you about a preparatory beat. There's a little opera, Christmas opera called A Mall and the Night Visitors. And in this, it's a story of a little boy who has a crutch, and his mother, they live in poverty, and the three wise men come to visit, to stay overnight on their journey to Bethlehem. And the mom sees all this gold and wonderful stuff that they're going to give to baby Jesus, and she takes some of it. And this little boy notices it, and he knows that's wrong, and he gives it back to one of the wise men. And suddenly, of course, his leg is healed. And one of the aides of the wise men is so overcome. He wants to touch the little boy's arm, kind of as a blessing. And he says, oh, little boy, may I touch you? May I touch you, little boy? And at this point, it's very quiet. And the wise man's aide is reaching to touch the little boy. And at this point, the conductor is getting ready for the French horn to play this beautiful silky little note as the man touches the little boy. And you know, French horns are they're like pictures. You can't really stare at them, or you can't engage with them very personally. That's just the way they are. But the guy who was conducting wasn't his favorite thing to do. So instead of, little boy, may I touch you? He sat there, little boy, may I? And he stabbed the air towards the French horn. And you can imagine the sound that came out of the French horn. It was not a very, it was a big splat. So anyway, it was like looking at the bug in front of the hood of your car, and it didn't work. There was no space. So I've decided that the space between the notes might be where all of music lies. It's not really a silent space. It's not the past. You know, the music doesn't lie in the note you played. It doesn't lie in the note you're about to play. It's almost like I don't know, it might be a union of all three of them, a nowness. I wouldn't say the present moment is in the space, but the place where our attention, my attention needs to go is right in that space, and everything can arise. So I've been practicing instruments, mostly harp, for 54 years, and had a Buddhist practice for 20. And I don't think it's a coincidence that my practice habits changed greatly, and I think for the better. So I'll just finish this little story about how I learned how to practice, and it involves memory. This is for solo work, and the metronome, which sounds terrible and horrifying, and it's the great equalizer, the metronome. So what I would do is take the metronome down to about the lowest tempo I could find, playing from memory. And what it does is it kind of deconstructs everything about that piece of music. There's no sense of style. There's hardly a sense of rhythm, no sense of forward motion. Everything is kind of just gone. And so you play the beat and you get ready for the next beat. And in between those beats is where it gets all messed up. So it's kind of like sitting on your cushion and counting to 10 when you first learn how to count your breaths. And you count to 3. And it turns out you were, I don't know, deciding what was for dinner that night. And you may have kept counting and you find out you're on 22, or you just know you were thinking about dinner and you come back and start over again. So my practice became like that I would inch the metronome up until I quit having so many disasters. And they, of course, they don't completely go away, but it has been a way to make that space where my mind can wander. I put my attention there. It's a very, very relaxed, wide space. And as I click the metronome up and bring back the style and attention to rhythm and all of that, it seems to have been a good thing to exercise those attention muscles. When you put the piece back together, you aren't tightly in that space, but it becomes more like a bare awareness. And for me, the best part is that the me is out of it a lot, not completely because I have a long ways to go, but my attention is not with me anymore so much. And in those spaces and putting the piece back together, I have the confidence to be inspired or take risks or have fun with the music without being stuck on me. So I think it's easier to express and experience music the way you want. So to close, The other thing I think I've noticed with Zen practice, and it's been a very slow process, and now that I'm talking about it, it'll probably get all distorted, and I don't know, it might change. But I've noticed that everybody, no matter what they do, especially if they're very good at it, there probably is a point at which they have, in a metaphor, their notes, like a construction worker, where the sense of me drops away, especially easier for people who are on the path, but I think anybody who is very good at what they do, I think that they can place their attention not quite on what they're doing exactly, not what they hope to accomplish by doing it, but in that space that allows them to have room to do what they need to do. So I think the best part is that it takes the me out of it, at least for a while. My me comes back all the time, which is why I keep practicing. So having said all of that, I had to work up a little tiny piece for the father of my children, the person I married when I was 19. And he's been writing a little piece. It's a lullaby. It's for grandchildren. So it's in a set of variations, and we keep having more grandchildren. So it's a piece in progress. And I only have 2 of the variations learned, but I thought I would play it for you and hope that my attention gets placed in the right way. So anyway, I will play this. It's written by Dr. Dean Roush from Wichita State. And anyway, we'll see what happens. So anyway, there you have it. And mostly I'm interested in everything that everybody else does if they find that this kind of thing has happened to them. So thank you for listening, your kind attention.
Just wanted to say you made me feel a little like Queen who asked his who would become his successor eventually a question, and 8 years later he answered. The wait was worth it.
Oh. Anyway, I don't expect you to have questions about playing harp or anything. But if you do, I mean, that's also fine too. But have I been kind of saying something that rings a bell with anybody? And most of you aren't as old as I am, so but you're on the path, so you're probably ahead of it, knowing what you're doing a little bit. Just wondering.
And again, folks, if you have questions or comments, please bring yourself off of mute, raise your hands. KuWasan, thank you so much for that beautiful expression of your journey and how it relates to your practice, and just in general, like the path through your life and how that's imparted some knowledge and wisdom and continues to do that. So Gasho, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom there. But people, please feel free to come off of mute, ask questions, comments, related to your own practice, ask KuWasan questions related to her practice, her playing, etc. Just, we welcome all the questions. Chi.
Let's see if I can formulate this question. Thank you. That was amazing. I wish you could play us something else. That was fantastic. Thank you. I was thinking about when you were saying that you slowed your playing down and there was a lot of stuff in those spaces that kind of filled your mind and kind of you were equating that to meditation. And I was thinking of the flow experience described by Mahaye Csikszentmihalyi, where he talks about in order to get into a flow state, and other people may be able to talk about this a little bit more than I can, that the task at hand has to sort of be at your upper level of ability. And it sounds like in some ways when you slow the playing down, when you slow the metronome down, that it's actually way below your ability. So then you're not in a flow experience anymore. So then stuff fills in those gaps. But I was also thinking about when we're sitting, we're kind of doing the same thing. So it's almost like we're trying in some ways in Zen to have a flow experience without the task at hand being something that maxes out your mental and physical capacity. It's almost like you're trying to in some ways trying without trying. You always get yourself into verbal tangles when you talk about trying anything in meditation, but in a way trying to sort of create something like a flow process without being so mentally and physically taxed at the same time. And I was wondering, maybe having said that, can you comment on maybe the meditation and kind of the playing, and maybe how when you slow down the playing, that some of that is similar to sitting, and that you're kind of noticing those, what your mind does in those spaces? That was about the most complicated way I could have said what I just said. I can't think of any way more complicated, but maybe you get the gist of it.
Yeah, and if I went the wrong way, please let me know. So metaphors are silly anyway, they hardly ever work. But I think the flow, when I slowed it down, the flow didn't go away. It was a different way to experience the flow. So I didn't want to confuse the flow with playing a piece all the way through. And so it was like when I did slow the metronome, it was almost like I was taking my first classes in how to sit, which is when you do find out, because when I first sat, I didn't realize that that voice in my head that was always doing this, I didn't know that it was a universal thing. I almost thought it was like my own personal problem. But then I found out in sitting that counting our breaths at least allows us to relax. And then we do notice that we have this voice, which was greatly comforting to me because it's right there all the time. I identified it as being me. So as we sit, we get more and more familiar with that voice, and we don't tell them to go away. We don't tell the monkey to get out of here and pack in your suitcase. We kind of give them a chair over on this other side of the room, ask him to just hang out for a while. And he doesn't always listen, but you get more and am I going the right way with meditation? You get more and more strong in your muscles, and you're not really trying to accomplish anything. And you're being gentle with your, well, you are trying to accomplish not to let monkey have the floor. So there's kind of a tricky gentleness to that. That's the only thing you're really trying, is to just allow yourself the space. Because if monkey is quiet, there's a little bit more space that you can settle into in the tanden and all of that, because it's hard to notice any of that when monkey is chattering. So with playing, it really was a problem with me all the way into my 30s, that I would just be going and going. And when I would, you know how when you're driving and you're driving to school and you're there and you don't remember driving, sometimes a very bad feeling. So I would be experiencing that when I would play, and the fact that I would come back, I would fall off my harp bench practically, and fake my way through with scales. People would say, "Oh no, she's playing scales." So no, I was really lost. So I don't know how I thought of doing this, but it occurred to me that if I could not play my piece slowly, and there's still a flow when you're playing it very slowly, it's just not as recognizable. But if I couldn't do that, there was something missing. So, and it's still not perfect, but it has changed a lot of things. Now I struggle with thinking of my piece in the night, and then I make up real bad problems for myself because I can't get through it mentally. But that's a whole different story. So did I, you can tell me if I didn't get it right.
I'm not sure I even asked a question. I just threw a bunch of stuff out there to see how you would comment on it. But it sounds like when you slow down that it maybe requires even more attention than when you're playing faster.
It places that, yeah, I guess that's fair to say. Instead of just skills, yeah.
Blair?
Hi, and thank you for the performance. That was really terrific. I'm a musician as well, and I just want you to know that you aren't alone in any of these thoughts and feelings you've had in your journey being a musician and then finding Zen. I've had a very similar experience with kind of learning to find that space in between the notes, being more mindful of things when I'm practicing, slowing stuff down and realizing how important that is to get back to kind of the fundamentals of playing. The muscle memory thing you talked about, I'm especially prone to. And when you take stuff down, when you play by muscle memory, your fingers often start to memorize mistakes as well as the right notes. And there's this curious thing that happens where you're not actually playing. You might have a part that you're not playing completely perfectly, and you learn to accept that as just the way that you perform it, because it's acceptable to you, and therefore it's acceptable to everybody that listens. And when you slow stuff down, I mean, if you ever want to fix that problem, then you really have to go to slowing things down, and it's so painstakingly terrible. And you think, I don't have the time for this, you know, and that's often the excuse for people to not meditate in general. You know, I don't have time to just sit there. I don't have time to just breathe for an hour. And in truth, like, if you did it, then you'd realize, one, you have more time than you think you do, and two, it's the most important thing you could be doing, I think.
I'll tell you, I pulled out some pieces that I learned when I was 17, and they aren't complete. Well, they're very much in my fingers still. And then I'll find myself playing what is not on the page, and I'll look on the page and I will see where my teacher has circled this stuff, like, and still as a 60-year-old, I'm playing it just like you said, the way that I learned it and was acceptable to me. And the other thing is, I also taught younger students. Some of them wanted to really figure it out, and some of them, their mothers made them come. But either way, sometimes it was very hard for them to practice. And the most difficult students, I said, okay, because their moms would come in and say, she didn't practice at all. So I would give them one measure, maybe two, and say, all I want you to do is spend the week on these two measures, and don't spend more than 5 minutes a day. And their mothers were, I think they wanted to find a new teacher, but it took a burden off of them, and they were able to kind of let whatever the problem was with practicing kind of go, and 5 minutes isn't too painful.
No.
Sometimes there was some progress.
And what one thing that I've been doing a lot during the isolation is transcriptions. And for everybody in the Sangha that doesn't know what transcriptions are, generally like a solo or something that's note for note as Louis Armstrong would play it, or Django Reinhardt. And I get into that muscle memory thing when I've learned the solo. But what I'm ideally trying to do with learning these solos is to learn how to play like these people. So I have to stop and say, why does this series of notes work over this chord? Because I could go ahead and I could just play this solo, but then how is that going to apply to my playing now when I'm performing with the band, and it's my turn to improvise? I can't play this solo from a different song over the song we're playing now. So it's another part of the breaking it down to fundamentals and taking that moment to say, okay, this melody works over this chord because, you know, it's a arpeggio of a dominant 7 over the B7. Anyway, I'm wandering off, but it's another part of the mindfulness of practice. And I do have a harp question for you, if you have a moment. Were you doing a harmonic with your wrist?
The base of my thumb.
That's cool.
And, yeah.
I didn't know that was a technique on the harp. That was very cool.
Yeah, cut the string, and you can do all the series of harmonics up the string.
Nice.
Either way. And
thank you for your teaching.
I
said thank you for your teaching again.
Oh, thank you for your questions and comments. You brought up something, improvising. I have a little experience, but not a lot. So I bow to you there, but I do know that jazz musicians aren't just like up in the clouds floating around. It's actually harder probably than anything, because you do have to pay attention to so many things. So I can't speak about it very well. And also I want to say muscle memory is a good thing to have. It's a very good thing to have.
Can you hear me now? Closer, close to the mic. I'm kissing the mic. Motor muscle memory, I think, kicks in with Zazen as well, like when you're driving on the expressway or sitting at the office or whatever. But I don't think it does so in the negative sense that you're mentioning, where you could be doing it wrong. In music, of course, you could be doing it wrong in any number of ways, but Zazen is so simple that when the body remembers the posture, the breath, and so forth, I don't think it can get it wrong.
Mhm. Oh, I would completely agree. Muscle memory could be perfect, but I think that's again where the metaphor might break down. So my muscle memory metaphor was more with distraction, but I certainly am grateful for the muscle memory that I have from trying to sit in Zazen. And I think you're right. It's not wrong. Does that?
Isn't it true that motor muscle memory, in a sense, is what allows us to perform? I think it was the famous quote from Van Cliburn: "If I miss a day of practice, I begin to notice. If I miss 2 days of practice, my audience begins to notice." So practice or rehearsal, practice in the sense of rehearsal, I think is aligning motor muscle memory with the right notes and the right, et cetera, right attack, right everything, I think.
Exactly. I just can't count on it for everything. So other than that, has anybody noticed in their line of work, be it woodworking or writing or counseling, whatever your profession is, about the way as your practice becomes more familiar with it, with you and you with it, that it kind of helps soften the sense of me in whatever you do?
Oh, all right. Okay, up on the mic. First of all, your playing was beautiful. I really enjoyed that. And also, I've a scientist for a living and musician avocation, and I think that the longer I'm in those two processes and the process of Zen, uh, uh, they kind of converge. They get more and more similar, and I think that similarity is the less of the self being involved in it. You let, in science, you get to a point where you let the data speak for itself and your opinion stay out of it. And as a musician, it's the same exact process, or at least it has been for me. And to me, that is almost the nature of Zen. And sitting, it's a lot like when you're playing at your best and you're the most playing the best you can. It's the sensation of that is a lot like sitting.
I would agree, and I honestly haven't had that many occasions in playing where that has happened. I count them on both hands. So
Yeah, well, they're very rare. I mean, they don't, but I can remember a handful. The first one that's coming to mind is really silly, but I was playing a gig, and this girl walks up to the front of the stage and she's smiling at me, and then she disappears into the bathroom, and I just keep playing, and she walks out of the bathroom, comes back and hung her bra on the headstock of my guitar, and then turned and walked out of the club, and I never saw her again. But I remember thinking, I will do this for the rest of my life. As long as I can fit this hand around the neck of a guitar, I will continue to do this. What that's got to do with Zen, I don't know. But, those moments like that are really transcendent, and they kind of put hooks in you and they keep you here.
And you played well through that whole thing. That was like one of your That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. I enjoyed your piece very much.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thank you.
And, KuWasan, this is Fusatsu. I'm in the corner, but I will speak to, as a nurse and now as a kind of a practitioner that I'm doing health informatics now on the calls day to day to day. My boss used to always give me feedback that I was so speedy. You know, you're like my speaking speedy, my typing. I'm still working with Sensei on some of my typos, and it's like what I can all immediately tell, like when I'm on a call, like orchestrating people, and you know, I used to go in with a solution in myself in my own head. I know how to fix this problem, and a shift happened probably about 10 years ago that said I don't have to fix this problem by myself. I can like throw it out to the group and they can help me. So I that was kind of parallel to when I first really started really getting into my sitting practice and making my mind settle. Like I can always tell when I'm not there, when I'm going in, I'm trying to solution it all about myself, and shifting that focus away from myself is something that I've noticed that evolved in my work, in my personal practice, and also when I was at the bedside working with patients. And I used to work in the neuro ICU, and there was a point where everything got quiet. You know, I'd be with the patients at night, you know, turning them and shifting them in their bed, you know, managing the ventilators and the ventricular, you know, drains, etc. And you're right, it was a point where I felt like things were just slowing down, and it shifted away from me to the actual patient. So I can see a lot of the transition of the way I am or was at the hospital at the bedside, and also the way that I am, you know, on my calls with folks today. So that's kind of how I kind of related to it. But it is kind of like the steadiness and when you said slowing down, I was like, wow, that's interesting that kind of how that translates in different professions. Yep.
Oh,
Shinja's
thank
got
you.
his hand up too.
Thank you, Fusatsu. I was worried that what I had to say would not make any sense, so I'm glad it brought something to you. And since I've gotten to know you, I think your middle name is something like one from community or something. That should be your middle name. And I do, in minutes, when you tell me what your committee has done, you do talk 80 miles an hour. It's true.
It was before that. It was probably 100 miles an hour. So if I keep on this path, maybe I can get down to 20.
Well, there's so much got to get it in, but yeah. Shinjin, yeah, thank you.
Yep. And Shinjin Sensei?
The one thing that all these processes have in common is as the self falls away, the thing that you don't have to contend with anymore is boredom.
Right.
Yeah. So you know you're not up against boredom. When the self starts to fall out of the process, so does boredom.
I can see that because of the same things that happen with the self that is very wearying and exasperating. It's also what you mean. I would agree. Thank you.
Bill, Katsuru, are you coming off mute?
Sure. I'm a therapist and a counselor, and KuWasan, your question about how what you're saying might apply to our practice and the lack of self definitely comes into play in counseling. I did it for quite a while, and in the beginning I felt such responsibility for the session and having an agenda. It was basically a lack of trust in the moment, a lack of trust in the silence. It took me a long time, and Gestalt approach was very helpful here to just be with the client, see what's up, take a breath, sit with them, and let them kind of unfold into the work that they need to do. And it usually worked out pretty well. So I too appreciate your talk, KuWasan, and it's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Katsuryu. Yeah, something like therapy. I can't even imagine, but I was curious as to whether when people started out, it was in whatever they are doing, it's a much tighter, self-centered sort of process. Thank you.
Yep, and folks, I'm going to do a quick time check. I think we have time for one more question before we're getting toward the end of our session with KuWasan. So please feel free to take advantage of that or not. Sensei, Hojo Sensei.
I did want to say that if you think you have the time to be bored, you're just unaware of the situation you're confronting.
That sounds like the ignorance I am trying to wipe.
In other words, boredom is poverty of imagination.
Wow. There's always something that comes up in our talks that will resonate for the rest of the week.
Thank you for that.
And KuWasan, since I'm not seeing any takers, do you have any last words or thoughts that you would like to leave us with? And I do have one other question. You had sent me a picture. Did you want me to share that? And did you want to speak a little bit about that, or?
I just didn't know if you needed a picture for whatever you might need a picture for. That was just another piano experience. When we moved our piano here, it wouldn't come up the stairs, so we had to fly it through the air on a crane before we put the railing on our balcony. So we have pictures of the piano flying. That was about it. But no, seriously, this was sort of an odd talk for me to put together because it did seem like I was talking a lot about myself. But like I said, since it was a story of how it's changed, Dharma has changed things, I guess I couldn't talk about anybody else in that sense. So thank you for your patience of listening to someone's story.
Thank you, KuWasan. As always, every time I asked you, you're always so willing to come and speak. So I am so gracious that you had took the time and the willingness to share with us your valuable story and practicing between the notes. So thank you so much. Before we, since you have
Also appreciation for KuWasan. She's been hosting our Tuesday night Cloud Dharma dialogue for how long now, KuWasan?
I don't know, a couple of years.
A couple of years.
Yeah.
So again, everyone, a big gasho for KuWasan for her teaching today. Gasho, KuWasan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And as always, we have to end with a few announcements. We're so grateful for those folks that are continued contributors. You keep us going. You keep us able to provide these teachings, support our teacher and these teachings beyond. So if you have not already done so, we'd ask that you consider contributing, value given, value received. Again, we also had wanted to let you know Sensei's book is still available. He just released it out. And please check it out if you would like a copy, if a conversation with him about that, he is ready for that. And we are also going to be having a session during our upcoming conference in May, where he'll be talking and being interviewed by Keisei about his newly released book. And it's also going to be the next book that we study in Cloud Dharma as well. And KuWasan, what does it start in June or May? What's the
First week of June, yes.
All right. So if you want up close and personal dialogue with our our Hojo Sensei, and also to questions about what you're reading, please partake in that opportunity. Next Saturday, we have our Just Sit Saturday. Gyoji is going to be leading that. It's an extended opportunity to sit. We also have our priest Ango in residence that he's here again. You've heard about the extended opportunity, but he's also going to be speaking next Sunday with us as well. So please make sure you come and participate and have questions, and then also reach out to Angan about opportunities to sit, to discuss with him, or to have a session with him while he's in Ango. That's an opportunity that you do not want to miss, as we have our priests coming for extended practice opportunities. Sensei Shinjin, anything else? All right. Again, check out our offerings on ASZC.org. Again, if you'd like to have a Dokusan with Sensei, please outreach to him directly. And again, we appreciate each and every one of you for your practice. And please take advantage of the multiple practice opportunities we have going on daily within the Sangha. So that being said, we're going to do our closing verses here. Sensei, if you'd ring the bell for us, great.
Are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless.
I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them.
The
The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Gasho, everyone. Have a good rest of those that Easter Sunday. Be safe, be well. We appreciate it, each and every one of you. Have a great week.